Hello, it's Doris, and I have 5 more books to share with you today. I read 10 books in February, so I'm pretty pleased with myself. I hit double digits again. I had to make a concerted effort on the last day of the month, but I did it. It's thrilling. So, I read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and this is one that I had pulled from the high school book room tour, and it's basically an autobiography written by Frederick Douglass, obviously, and it chronicles his life as a slave from his early years up until he escapes and becomes a free man and starts, he gets married and he starts speaking for the abolitionist movement. The introduction, there are a couple letters written by abolitionists, and I believe at the time they were probably necessary as introductions to this literature to get it read more widely among the white abolitionists and the people that were supporting the cause. But they were a little flowery and full of pomp and circumstance. I didn't enjoy them as much, but I understood their relevance. But the writing of Frederick Douglass was really good. It was very simply written and to the point, and it was great. I read it. I was trying to add some more literature for Black History Month, which this I just think was a really good addition for me. And one thing I really got out of it, he really comes down hard on religion, Southern religion, and how it was used to oppress the slaves and the black man. And he even in the end wrote an addendum to say he wasn't against Christianity in general, but he was just explaining how religion was used to excuse slavery. Yeah, just a really good book. I learned a lot from it, and I just liked that it was not flowery. It just got to the point, and I felt like it was a very fair portrayal of slavery in the South, both in the South and more of what I would consider the North, but was slave states at the time. Just a really good portrayal of that and a good addition to that body of literature and information. The next one that I finished was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and this is an arc. This book is releasing this month, and I'm not sure of the exact date. I don't know if it's out already or if it's coming out. I should have looked that up, but I did not. Maybe I'll try to put it in the information. If you haven't read the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series and you like fantasy fiction, I highly recommend that series. I almost didn't read it because the dust jacket is so strange. It talks about teeth and weird worlds, and I was just like, what in the world? But then when I read it, it was just fascinating. Very creative world that she built. And this one to me is just even better. She's matured a little bit as a writer, and wow. The world is incredible. It's kind of a little bit of a godlike aspect in part of the beings that are involved in this story, but they're real people too, if that makes sense. And it's not completely explained in this first installment, who they are and where they came from. Just fascinating. So the world is just, her world building skills are tremendous. Her characterizations are so much better in this one. She just is brilliant. Like, every character in this story, you don't, even the ones that you think, oh, well, that's the bad guy, they're not any of them all bad or all good. I mean, well, some of the dead ones, they're already dead as the story begins. They sound pretty all bad. But the characters that she's introduced in the storyline that she's telling at this point are just so dimensional, and you kind of want them all to turn out to be good guys and successful for the most part. I mean, there's just so much depth to them, and so much, complications with their lives and how they turned out. I don't know, it's just great characterization in this. Her writing style is beautiful. It's a nice pace, but very literary. There's some beautifully worded passages in it, but you don't ever get slowed down. It's just fascinating. And there's a librarian as the hero. I mean, come on. That's just awesome. The only thing for me was there was a little too much of the flowery romanticism right at the end. She could have cut just a tiny percentage of that. I mean, I think it's essential to the plot, but she just went on and on a little bit extra. But, that's fine. But this is great, and I'm going to be very anxious to hear when the sequel is coming out, and if it's going to be 2 or a trilogy, or, I can't remember if Smoke and Bones was a trilogy. I think it was. But anyway, great new series from Laini Taylor. Total home run. I think it's classified as young adult, but I would not let that hold me back, because this is solid literature right there. And then I finished The Muse by Jessie Burton. This is by the same author as The Miniaturist, which I've not read, but now I'm very anxious to read. Because this book, it's kind of a dual historical timeline. Not kind of, it is. The main story is in 1967, and then the flashbacks are from 1936, and it's very international too. The present day story is in England, London, England, and the flashback part is in Spain, and the main character in the modern part is actually a UK citizen, but she's from Trinidad, so she's Caribbean. I got several cultural and historical bits of education for myself out of this book. I knew nothing about a Spanish Civil War / revolution with communism. I knew nothing about that, so that was very interesting to learn about. And I've mentioned this before, that I'm really fascinated by how history is discussed in different countries. The same historical timeline, you can get different perspectives from, different people. And obviously, my perspective on the 1960s is vastly different from where I was raised than someone from even England would be. So, for example, 67 is right at the end of the civil rights movement in the States, and it was just really interesting. My perspective is more, the 60s are more violent and critical and harsh, and a lot of changes going on in the States with civil rights. And here in England, it's written a lot softer, but it's still there, because its main character from Trinidad, she's a black woman, and she's a writer. The woman in the story is a writer, but she speaks about more subtle racism, but just very interesting. Very interesting. It's about the art world. And there's, I mean, it's not a mystery, but there is some mystery about how the characters in the modern part of the story relate to the characters in the past storyline. And yeah, and I actually, this was, you know, a cover purchase that I was thrilled with. Like, that is just gorgeous to me. So I was very fascinated to kind of figure out how the little bits, as I read the story, how they all played in. And I figured it all out except the snakes. That if anybody remembers how the snakes played into the story, let me know, because I didn't quite grasp that part. But everything else, I was figuring it out. But I totally enjoyed this, and I'm anxious to read the miniatures now. I think I'm going to read that one this month, because I believe it's set in Amsterdam during maybe the tulip craze. I'm not sure about that part, but I think it's much, much, much more past history than this one. So I'm very interested in reading more of that author. And now this one is pretty funny. This was the last day of the month when I was trying to grab something that I could breeze through and finish in one evening, a couple hours time, so that I could, you know, say that I'd hit double digits in February. So I finally decided on this one, Go Ask Alice by Anonymous. This is one that I read as a teenager, and I remember reading it, and I remember it having an impact on me. It's basically a diary written by a girl that accidentally or is tricked into going on a pretty major drug trip at a party. And then how she gets interested in drugs and spirals down and becomes homeless and yada, yada, yada. My perspective reading this as an adult was vastly different. As an adult, first off, I'm like, Anonymous? Because reading it, I'm like, this is not a 15-year-old's writing. Not a chance. And of course I Googled it, and it's not anonymous. There's an author. And then I saw all the other book titles, and I just laughed. It's basically, she wrote scare tactic novels, same format, diary perspective, for every kind of bad thing that teenagers ever did back in the day. So, and to be fair to my teenage self, obviously I was a teenager and more gullible, but we didn't have the internet back then either. Ha ha. So I couldn't just Google and find out that Anonymous wasn't really anonymous. And, being a teenager myself, I didn't realize that the writing was off. And then there were other things. I mean, basically my perspective was this was a little piece of crap fluff writing. I hate to be that harsh, but yeah, there were holes in it, like, that wouldn't happen if she was on the street, But, there were, on the flip side, I actually really enjoyed reading this because it was like a little time capsule to myself. Like, reading it, I remembered being a teenager, and I remembered that, I was a pretty naive little goody-goody that would never have done anything in this story. Totally. And I just remember being so shocked and yeah, it made me laugh, but not so much. And then I finished off the month with Bitter Blue, and this is part of the Graceling trilogy. And fantasy series, young adult. I really liked the world building in this series. She did a really good job with that, and it's very tropey. All three of them are very tropey, but in an interesting sort of way. I really liked that each book had a completely different take on the world. Like, the first two books were basically completely different worlds, actually. Like, there was a mountain between them, so they didn't know about each other, but, you know, one person from this world finds out about the other one. I really liked that she pulled characters from the original story into this one and had them be secondary figures in this story, but each one of the books kind of ties itself up. They don't continue the way trilogies often do, so each one is more or less self-contained. This one was a little bit slower for me than the other two. It's very political, so it's not your typical fantasy story. It's more monarchy and politics involved with that, and very little of the fantasy part, actually. But I enjoyed it. I listened to most of it on audio, and then I read some when I would lose my audiobook because I didn't finish it in time. And with this one, I really kind of should have read the whole thing. I think I would have enjoyed it more because I would have powered through it quicker. The audiobook just kind of drug it out, and being that the book itself was slower paced and then the audiobook was slower paced, it just kind of double whammy on the slowdown. So, but yeah, I would really recommend this series. I enjoyed it. So, those are my, let me put my 5 more for the second half of February. Oh, and I didn't mention these 3 were my Time Hopathon books. So I did finish 3 of the Time Hopathons. So yay. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon. Bye.